Taylor Decker's on my all-22 fantasy team, by the way.
Stop it. Nobody cares.
Taylor,
I don't care, and I'm in the league.
I'm just trying to hype up the future of fantasy football here. They told me we could hype it up.
Nobody cares about your fantasy team. That's one of the
It's
cardinal
my
rules
way.
of broadcasting. Regardless of the medium, they don't care.
So the strategic component to this game is through the roof.
Your predictions, right? Your forecasting in fantasy football into how good is this player.
It's gonna change the industry.
Yeah, I moved to the old town where it goes down. Look at me now. I wrote my goals down. I hold it down. Made myself proud. Say, look at me now.
Welcome in to the All-22 podcast. I'm Chris Lombardi, and I'm joined by Ray Cotto. The last few weeks, we've been releasing slowly, the updated position weights. Again, for our game, All-22, we use position weights timed PFF grading to give you your points for the week. So that's how we keep score, essentially. This week, though, right, we listed, I think, 4 different positions that we have not spoken about yet, Ray. So we need to do that. We're a little behind the 8 ball, so we got to jump right in. Let's start off with guard. Guard had the slightest increase from 3.8% to 3.87%. So as always, I'm going to ask you the question, what impacted the weight increase at guard?
It's basically just Chris Lindstrom. He signed a contract for $20.5 million per year in March, which raised the average for the group. I think the highest contract prior to that was $20 million even per year on average. So gave a slight premium and just raised that top 5 average for the position group overall. So ever so slightly, which is why you see that ever so slight bump.
Right. And Lindstrom, like you said, barely raises it, but him and Quentin Nelson are now the 2 highest paid guards by a pretty decent margin. I think the next guy under them is Elgton Jenkins at $17 million. So it's a $3 million bump from those guys. So we did see that increase a little bit. Love to see that for Lindstrom. He had basically a legendary season for All-22. And then right behind them, Lindstrom, Nelson, Jenkins, Brandon Sheriff, and then Bitonio are the 5 highest paid guards. So those are the guys that are impacting the weight. As always, right, we're looking at those top 5 guys. We're saying some of them are kind of on the older side. I don't know if I would take them high up in a startup All-22 draft. So when we then go and rank these guys, we're taking into account all different things, which I've explained a few times, and I'm going to explain it again. So it's age, it's position grading for the last 3 years, it's position weight, it's snap count for the different years, the draft position of the player if it's a young player, right? We want to know, did the team draft them in the first round or were they a 7th round pick just overachieving? We want to know their surroundings, guard, right? Who's the tackle next to them? Are they going to have to cover for a lot of deficiencies on the offensive line, or are they just a piece that's being added to an already great offensive line? So all things we consider, especially at the guard position. But Ray, upcoming, we have Michael Onwenu, Robert Hunt, and Ezra Cleveland, all part of that 2020 class that should be guys getting paid, if not that 20 million range, pretty darn close. So what do you think? Are those 3 guys going to get paid?
I'm a huge fan of Hunt and Onwenu, especially. So I think I got sniped in our inaugural draft for him, so was pretty bummed about that. But yeah, I think those are the next 2 up. Are they going to clear Lindstrom? I'm not sure quite about that. There's the whole, idea of you're the latest contract in the market, and so you kind of reset the market whenever you're the next big guy to sign that big deal. At the same time, Lindstrom is slowly kind of ascended himself to that top tier, almost all his own lately. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out. But I think for sure they're definitely going to be in that top 3 range that you see currently at the very least. So some additional reinforcements kind of coming up there for guard, which could increase their value in the years to come, in the next couple of years, for a position that overall in the league, as we've kind of mentioned, is not very deep, right? So you really need those top guys to sign those big contracts and to kind of carry the water, if you will, because you have those top guys. And then after that, it is a clear drop off to sort of everybody else after guard, maybe 6 or 7.
And we've talked about Onwenu being this guy who plays a bunch of different positions, right? And sometimes for New England, he's not even the starter, which is bizarre considering how good he's played and how good he's graded. I think for him to reach that 20 million range, he's probably going to have to sign elsewhere. The Patriots aren't really known for spending big on offensive linemen. They draft them, and a lot of times they hit, right? And those guys do well. So I'd like to see Onwenu go somewhere else, get that big payday, and find a position he could call home. And I think that's probably for all 22 users what they would want too for a guy they invest that highly in. But again, going back to our top five, right? So it's Lindstrom, it's Onwenu, it's Quentin Nelson, and then a guy like Trey Smith falls at 4. He's a younger guy still, right? So he's not necessarily a guy that's going to be paid soon, but he's already kind of seen in that same light as some of these top guys. So do you think that we have him ranked appropriately, or do you think maybe he should be a little higher on this list?
Oof. I'm a huge fan of Trey Smith. It's easy to say, oh, have him higher, but again, who are the names above him?
So Lindstrom, Onwenu, and Quentin Nelson.
Yeah,
so pretty good players.
It's hard to say, okay, that's the name I'm going to put down below him, right?
Mhm.
So I think he's appropriately ranked, but in any given year could finish higher than one of those names, right? He's a huge talent, a superb talent who really only fell in the draft because of some medical questions around, I think, blood clotting or something to that effect, where there was concern that he wouldn't be able to practice very often and so forth, which it's whatever. It's 2023. I mean, what do the practices really consist of anymore? So whatever. But talent wise, he's right up there with the best of them, and he's got age on his side. He's one of those, again, in that top tier before you see the drop off.
And then we have some guys that are on the older side, like a Bitonio. We also have Zach Martin, right? Guys like that are just sitting there right outside that top 5. Would you ever consider taking one of them above a top prospect like a Trey Smith?
No, I wouldn't. I'm the age guy too, though, so I definitely would not. But no disrespect to them as good players, but I'm taking the young guys first, especially because, as we see, it's hard. There haven't been many good guards to enter the league in recent years, so it's not as if you just kind of have a factory line of these guys coming in, like at receiver, for example, where you have at least a handful of really good players every single year entering the draft that you can maybe pick up and backfill to develop later on. Guard is not like that. It's rare to find the big men that move well enough and perform well enough to make a difference for your team. So if you have the choice between having one of those types of players for 2 to 3 or 4 years versus 7 to 10, I'm taking the player I can have for 7 to 10 because I don't have to stress about finding that type of rare prospect for a while.
Right. And then something you kind of touched on, right, is there hasn't been a lot of great guards drafted in the NFL in the last few years. And now we look at the rookies, right? So our top rookies are Avila, Torrance, Bradford, Zavala, and Saw. Like some of these guys, I'm going to be honest, I didn't watch their film yet. They're guys that kind of flew under the radar, but the NFL invested in them early, right? So we ranked these rookies based on how the NFL picked them. None of them were drafted in the first round. And then again, some of these are guys that, a team might see something in where NFL kind of evaluators just miss them completely. So what faith do you have in any of these guys, if any? And when do you start taking guys like this?
I don't have much faith in many of them, to be honest. I mean, for those who listen to the Daily, I'm a big fan of Antonio Mafi, for example, but maybe am leery about how he will actually grade given his style of play. We need guys who are going to grade well on a consistent basis, and that's not exactly Mafi's game. I am intrigued by City Sao, but that's just kind of a late round flyer type deal. I mean, the main rookie guard, if you will, that I'm intrigued by and would put some type of investment in is someone who currently isn't listed at guard, who may project to be at guard for this upcoming season, in Matthew Bergeron, who I think is currently projected to play left guard for the Falcons, but wasn't officially listed as a guard just quite yet, and kind of had that tackle guard tweener labeled to his name. So if that shakes out to where he does move on to the interior of the offensive line, then I would be high on Bergeron. He went to a good offensive line and an offense as a whole that has a concrete identity for running the football effectively. So they know what they are. They know what they do. He would be lined up next to Jake Matthews, a veteran, to his left at tackle over there. So that's always a big plus for rookies coming in, to have that sort of veteran to lean on there alongside them, to bring them along. So I think there are a lot of things working in his favor if Bergeron ends up at left guard, and then obviously would be listed as such moving forward. So outside of that, of the quote unquote like pure guard only type players that we had in this last class, I'm not really terribly high on any of them, which goes back to the point as to why I would take a younger guy like Trey Smith over someone like Zach Martin, who maybe perform a bit better right now, but doesn't have that longevity to his game.
So I think it's worth mentioning a guy that we were both pretty down on. And I think the draft kind of proved us right with Osiris Torrance, right? He didn't go until pick 59, but he did land with the Bills, right? So the situation that everybody was predicting just maybe a round later than he was supposed to. He's not a guy I really like. He's really raw, and he's older. So I don't know how much improvement is really left in him, but he is this massive body that's going to an offense that will kind of cover up a lot of his blemishes. So I think there's definitely an investment worthwhile there, not as a first or second round pick in all 22 drafts, maybe not even a third or fourth round pick, but if somehow he slips at the end of the fourth or fifth round, I think that's a great spot to take a shot on a guy like him, considering how hard it is to hit on guards. And another guy, I was a big fan of Cody Mock, and he lands in Tampa. I don't know what position he's going to play. Again, he was a guy that played tackle in college. I think he's projected to move to guard in the NFL. And there's a chance he ends up lining next to, Tristan Wirfs, which would be incredible situation for him and a great situation for that team. And just somebody that I would take a risk on, right? And that's a guy maybe more of like a 7th round pick. He's like the last guy I'm going to take in an all 22 draft, but a worthwhile investment if I'm going to invest in any of these guys.
Yeah, that's a good one. Big fan of Malcolm, more so on the inside than on the outside. If that's where he ends up, the overall surroundings in Tampa Bay may not be great, but if you're next to Tristan Wirfs, that negates a lot of it. And if you have Jensen coming back, that could be a good spot.
Yeah, and I've said it before privately. I'll put my neck out on the line again and say it, but I think that Tampa is one of those teams that if they do things right with the draft this year, if they hit on some of the guys like Cody, it could be a quick turnaround, right? Like it doesn't have to be this long rebuild, considering they have a Wirfs, they have a Chris Godwin, they have some fundamental pieces that you really like for a team, especially on offense, that it's really just, what are they going to do at quarterback? If they can hit on quarterback in the draft next year, I don't see them being a bad team for long. But let's move on. Let's go into defensive interior. I'll let you answer that though, of course.
No, I was just going to say that, it wasn't that long ago that Baker Mayfield was like a top 12 quarterback in all 22 startup. So, I don't know.
We totally missed the ball. You're right. You're right. We totally missed it.
Yeah, sure. That's that's definitely it. Not that his like shoulder was out of the rest of his body,
True.
Sure.
True. All right, let's move on. We're going to stay kind of close to the ball. Let's go on the defensive side, though, to defensive interior. That had a pretty nice increase, right? So they went from 4.96% to 5.14%. And it's a position that you can start 3, right? So you're going to get that 5.14% for the first 2. And then you're going to get the kind of like that, not flex, but that third player weight on the third one if you do decide to start 3, if you're running a 3-4. So love that, right? So it's an important position to invest in, and it's a deeper position than you would maybe think just at first glance. But Ray, tell us why, again, that weight was impacted.
Yeah, the big one to note is Daron Payne signed a big deal in March for $22.5 million per year. It's funny when you look at this position and you see sort of the gulf between Aaron Donald and everyone else. Aaron Donald's getting paid over $31 million per year on his current deal. So whereas, someone like Daron Payne, I just mentioned, big deal, 22.5. And I think Jeffrey Simmons is up there at 23.5 million per year on a 4-year deal as well. So those are 2 fantastic players on big deals, and they are like $8 million plus off of what Aaron Donald is currently making on an annual basis. So Donald is definitely sort of dragging the rest of these guys, even though the other big contracts are respectable in their own right. Um, but I do think that's more so due to the talent of Aaron Donald compared to everybody else versus how teams value interior defensive linemen. So um, it's not one of those deals where, okay, once Donald, whenever he does call it quits or that contract is off the books, at this positional sort of plummet. I think there's some good young players sort of on the come up. Like you mentioned, this position group is deeper than you might expect. So as those deals sort of come to fruition, and they continue to sort of stack on the contracts that you see from Daron Payne and Jeffrey Simmons, they'll kind of hold steady. They might, eventually sort of drop in value a little bit once Donald comes off the book, but by and large, they'll still be a premium position to build your team around, which I think is what you'd expect.
Yeah, it's very strange to have a position where you have three players that got paid. Simmons, Payne, and Hargrave all got paid this offseason, and they barely made a dent in the weight impact because of how far ahead Donald is, right? Even after these massive deals come through. So that's definitely unique. And there are a lot of upcoming deals that are going to influence this with the top 5 ranked guys, right? So if we look at our top 5 ranked, we have Quinnen Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Derek Brown, Jeffrey Simmons, and Chris Jones. So a few of those guys have been paid, but we're still looking at Quinnen Williams and Derek Brown going, that each one of those guys can, surpass Jeffrey Simmons and Payne's deal. And I think Quinnen Williams definitely will. And he'll probably, the reason he probably hasn't been paid yet is because he's pushing a deal close to what Aaron Donald got paid, when everybody else is saying, no, the real number is what Jeffrey Simmons got paid.
Yeah, and that's what guys will argue, right? But not that that'll be old news, but that'll be the previous market, right? So the market will always be higher than that and might inch up closer to where Donald is now by the time those contracts roll around.
Yeah, for sure. And there's one guy that did get paid, but it was after we locked in the weights, and that's Dexter Lawrence. So that's another guy that should influence that top 5 number. So we are seeing this as a position that's going to increase in value year over year, as long as there's guys that continue to step up and just make a name for themselves. So going back to our top 5, though, Ray, what do you think so far? So Quinnen Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Derek Brown, Jeffrey Simmons, and Chris Jones. What do you think of that top 5?
I'd have to agree. I don't really see any issues with it. I mean, you see the talent and youth of the position. Those guys really just sort of epitomize it. And I mean, you can go deeper beyond that. There's great players that might just have an extra, couple of years on those guys, so they might not have the longevity, right? Where you're talking about a Vita Vea, Kenny Clark, guys like that, DJ Reader, who are all still really good players that sort of round out the rest of that top dozen or so guys. So it's a deep group, but when you talk about the combination of talent and age and longevity, I think there's not much to argue with that, top 5 or 6 names there.
Sure. And I think, people are going to ask, they're going to ask about Aaron Donald not being included in there. And I'm not going to ask you the question because you're the age guy, but Aaron Donald's 32. And last year he dealt with some injuries. He still performed at an extremely high level. But do we see that continuing for, 4 years, I think, or 3 years, right? Even I'm a guy that says you should make an investment looking at the next 3 years. You shouldn't try to make one for 10 years. Ray and I see a little differently on that. But even Aaron Donald being 32 years old, I don't know if you have 3 years guaranteed in there, where the rest of the guys, I think you easily do, even including Chris Jones, who's, not significantly younger, but he's, going to be 29 this year. That 3 years takes him to where Aaron Donald is now. So that's why I think Aaron Donald really isn't on that list. But another guy, Ray, from this upcoming draft was Jalen Carter. So Jalen Carter did not make our top 5. I think, we hear the press, we hear people saying he's the best thing since sliced bread, but there's a lot of concerns, right, with the legal stuff that he has issues with. Do you feel good about him not being in our top 5?
Yeah, I don't want to jump the gun on him too much, right? I mean, D tackle is a position, or defensive interior is a position where there's enough guys with youth who have proven it already, where you don't have to jump them based on what you project someone to be, right? It's not like running back, where really the prime years of a running back are those first 4 or 5 years. So it's much easier to project someone like a Bijan Robinson to enter into that top 5 group. Whereas defensive interior, you have guys who can stick around, like you see with Aaron Donald, play well into their early 30s. So there's no need to sort of jump the gun and just say, well, here's what Jalen Carter could be, so I'm going to put him above, I don't know, I'm going to put him above a Jeffrey Simmons, for example, right? That's there's no need to do that quite yet. There's plenty of opportunity to let it play out because these guys have proven it, and they're much safer bets before you even get into, hey, what off the field stuff can maybe impact these things as well.
And he did land at number, I believe, 8 on our list, which is still very, very high for a rookie defensive interior. But he was our top rookie. So it was him, Kalijah Kancey, Mazi Smith, Brian Bresee, and then Benton, who was a guy I really liked out of Wisconsin. So that's the top 5. That's how the NFL took them. But Ray, is there a guy whose landing spot you liked, more than maybe some of the other guys?
Oh,
and you're not allowed to
Smith, maybe what do you mean I'm not allowed to say? You can't say.
I was going to say you're not allowed. I was going to say you're not allowed to say Jalen Carter because him landing in Philly, it's almost like a cheat code, right? It's too easy.
That's
so go somewhere. Yeah,
that's too obvious. That's basically like Jalen Carter staying at Georgia. Like, oh, we got the guy that you played next to, and then the guy who played behind you at Georgia is also there, and then like the other guy you played next to, Nolan Smith, is also there. Yeah, they're just recreating the Georgia Bulldogs there. So there's not really much to discuss in Philadelphia. We know it's a good on-field situation for him as long as he can stay on the field. But Mazi Smith, love the fit. There's a bevy of pass rushers in Dallas, really, right between Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, Dorrance Armstrong, Sam Williams. They have the guys to provide the edge pressure. And then even on the interior, Oso Digizua is more of that 3-tech sort of penetrating, quick twitch type of player as well. They needed someone with Mazi Smith's skill set who will just be asked to first and foremost provide a presence in run defense, which is what he was asked to do at Michigan. And a lot of people take that and they look at his career at Michigan and go, well, he's not a pass rusher. You didn't see much pass rush from him and so forth, but he wasn't asked to do that at Michigan and wasn't relied on to do that at Michigan. That doesn't mean he can't. When I watched the film, I thought he was more than capable of being able to provide that pass rush as far as having that ability with his core strength and sort of the spring in his legs and all that good stuff. But another underrated thing, if this holds and they keep him, is that Jonathan Hankins is also still in Dallas, who's a veteran lineman who basically is built in the same mold as Mazi Smith, that sort of big-bodied, run-stopping type player who does all the dirty work. So it's good to have that type of presence in the organization, on the team, for a young guy like Mazi Smith as well. So it's not just the fact that, oh, he's surrounded by pass rushers, he's got a great defensive coordinator in Dan Quinn, and so all he's going to be asked to do right now is to do what he does best, which is be a big body to stop the run. But he's also got that sort of veteran presence from a player perspective to lean on early in his career as well. So there's a lot of things going for Mazi Smith, aside from the fact that he is severely underrated and so many of you are just not giving him his proper due as a player in his own right.
Well, I had a conversation with friend of the pod, Chris DePalma, today about something similar, because I think the NFL sometimes tries to do too much with some of these players that have a skill set that is geared towards one thing, right? And we see it a lot at linebacker. These guys are taken early. I heard Brad Spielberger say that there's been 16 linebackers chosen in the first round since 2016, and not a single one has received a second deal with the team that drafted them. So what I think the reason is because they're asked to do so much. The NFL tries to target these hybrid guys, expecting them to be able to be a blitzer, a run stopper, and a coverage guy, which is almost impossible for anyone, right? There's not a position in the NFL other than linebacker asked to do something as diverse as that. And I think they fail. I think defensive interior might be the next thing, right? Where they're asked to be these massive run stoppers, but then also asked to apply pressure. I think you get a lot more success when you let a guy develop naturally. I think that's why you see guys like Quinnen Williams and Derek Brown who weren't like instant hits from their rookie seasons. I think it's because they were asked to do a lot and it takes time to develop into that. I could see that being similar for a guy like Mazi Smith, who has kind of one skill set right now. And if the Cowboys kind of focus him on that, I think he'll have a lot of success and allow him to gradually become more than, this all-around player. That's going to take time. It's going to take multiple years, and it takes almost everyone at the position multiple years. So I do like that. I like Mazi Smith in Dallas.
Yeah, I think so. Real quick, it's funny you say that because a lot of people, if you go back 15 months ago, people were saying, "Hey, is this Derek Brown guy a bust?" He performed poorly both in his first 2 years. Carolina being a young team there that kind of invested a lot in youth on their defense. So he was asked to do a bunch, right? And he had 2 years of subpar grading, under 70 grading, before kind of really blowing up in 2022, where now everybody says, okay, this is a premier player on the interior of the defense here. This is a cornerstone type guy. No one was saying that 15 months ago. They were kind of questioning if he would ever become that guy. So you're right. It takes time. And if you just fill up their plate, to the brim initially, you're going to have those growing pains.
Absolutely. And since you did it, I'm going to do it too. So my guy is Lucas Van Ness for the Packers. Hated the pick when it came out. Was happy that we didn't go tight end because it's a low value position. So I was happy that we at least went with something a little more high value with defensive interior / maybe edge. The reason I'm talking about him here is because I actually think he will become a defensive interior for the Packers. I don't see him as a stand-up guy. We do a lot of 3-4. So allow Preston Smith and allow Rashawn Gary to be your stand-ups, and allow Lucas Van Ness to do what he does well, put his hand in the dirt next to Devontae Wyatt, next to Kenny Clark, and it will be kind of a low pressure situation for him. And I always talk about that. I like a rookie to be able to go into a situation where he's kind of like a value add. It's not that he is the one providing all of the value. He's going to be a value add because I think that will help his grading in all 22. So yeah, Lucas Van Ness, if he ends up becoming a defensive interior over time, love that spot for him landing in Green Bay.
Okay, you love it. So can I say one more too, kind of a sleeper as well?
Absolutely.
Before we move into another position. So something to sort of store away is Gervon Dexter, if I'm saying that correctly, in Chicago. Justin Jones has been pretty unimpressive over there in Chicago. Didn't have a good year last year as well. Dexter has a fabulous run stop rate, near the tops of the country, if I recall correctly. And I kind of like his upside as well. A similar thing where I'm not going to start him anywhere this year, but maybe in year 2 or definitely by year 3, I think he's got the chops to kind of have an ascension, maybe to a lesser degree, but sort of a similar path to Derek Brown on the interior of the defense. So just another young name to stow away.
And he's on the Bears, you said, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that Bears defense put a lot of investment in there. You have to like that. There's going to be a couple like really mature linebackers playing behind him. So, again, maybe it makes the situation, which seems maybe like a difficult one, a little bit easier for him to transition into. But yeah, so let's move to running back, which had the biggest dip of any position, going from 3.44% to 2.94%. And why was that weight impacted, Ray?
It's supply and demand, right? There was so much supply that there was no big demand, right? I mean, what was the big deal? There really was none. I think all eyes are on sort of what happens with Saquon Barkley here. He was slapped with the tag, which doesn't obviously impact or increase the overall value or top value at the position, since that's just an average of those top contracts there. So with the quality that was available in the draft and in free agency and potentially on the trade market, when we're hearing names like Dalvin Cook as well, there was really no incentive for any team to spend big money on a running back. So they didn't. So with other positions signing big contracts for top players and running backs standing pat, naturally they fell in value.
Sure. And it was kind of interesting to watch that Giants situation where it was, are they going to pay Daniel Jones? Are they going to pay Saquon? Are they going to tag Daniel Jones? Are they going to tag Saquon? And I don't know if Daniel Jones maybe did Saquon a disservice because he waited till the last minute, right, to agree to that deal. That didn't really give the Giants time to negotiate with Saquon. They tagged Saquon, but he wasn't the only one that got tagged. So it was Saquon and Josh Jacobs. So those two guys get tagged, and those are really the two big names. Oh, and Tony Pollard, right? So 3 names
Tony Pollard, that
all could have gotten paydays, all get the tag, which is not a big number for running backs. And that's the market, right? It's will those guys really get their payday? I don't know. And then, it's Jonathan Taylor from the 2020 class, who's a year after these guys, but we're seeing a lot of 2020 class players getting paid right now. So, will Jonathan Taylor end up getting a payday before some of these guys? I don't know. But those are the guys I think that we should be looking at next. And then let's go to the top 5, right? So it's Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and Nick Chubb are all of the running backs that right now carry the biggest salary on an average per year basis. So Christian McCaffrey still kind of killing it, slaying it, but like getting a little bit older. Kamara coming off of injuries last season, might have some legal issues this season, might end up facing a suspension. Also getting older. Dalvin Cook doesn't look like he's going to stay on that team, might get released. So another guy just like not really looking great. Derrick Henry is going to be 30 years old, I think, this year, and they drafted a running back to pretty early on to maybe replace him. And there was a lot of speculation that he was going to be traded. And then maybe the one solid guy besides McCaffrey is Nick Chubb, who's this kind of, do it all back who just goes to work every day with his hat and pail and just grinds it out. So the top 5 is looking a little uneasy at running back, which is exactly why we're not seeing Saquon, Jacobs, and Pollard getting paid, right? It's with the injuries to Saquon and Pollard, it just makes a lot of sense for those teams to wait. Jacobs, I could see them maybe getting a deal done, but it is interesting.
Yeah, so tough. And you mentioned Nick Chubb as sort of the jewel of this handful of names as being the steady, consistent guy, right? But for how long? He's going to be or is 28. That contract lasts for another 2 years. I imagine he'll probably play out that contract and they won't take the out after the 2023 season over there in Cleveland. But then after that, after 2024, he's a 30-year-old free agent running back. Who's going to sign up for that? So it's a churn and burn position. And even those top 5 names are already burning. So I do think that this draft class came at a really good time because it was deep with talented players at a time when the running back position needed it. Now, as far as how that will affect big contracts being signed by that position, yeah, that's kind of the double-edged sword there because the rookies are so talented. Teams are kind of opting to go that route, not spend big money on veteran contracts. And as a result, we're not going to see big money spent at that position for quite a while. Again, I think Saquon might be the guy to carry that water for the position if they can get a deal done, because it doesn't seem like there's any indication that Dallas wants to spend big money on someone like Pollard, even though they slapped the tag on him. They just went through what they went through with Ezekiel Elliott, which they should have seen coming at the time they did it. So I doubt they're really willing to sort of jump into that pool again. So it's a bleak prognosis for the big contracts and how that might affect the value or weight of that position. But there's some good talent coming in.
There is. So let's go to the top 5 that we have ranked, which is Jonathan Taylor at 1, Bijan at 2, Christian McCaffrey at 3, Josh Jacobs at 4, and then Breece Hall at 5. And again, McCaffrey and Jacobs, they're getting a little bit older, but they still provide a lot of value. And I would say that they're likely to have at least 2 years of really solid production, and you might even get that third year out of one of them, maybe Jacobs, because I think McCaffrey's a little older. When I looked at that top 5 again, right, I think the conversation is going to fall on Taylor versus Bijan, and there's an argument to be made for both, right? So Jonathan Taylor behind that Colts offensive line has been a little rough the past year, but they make a couple investments on the line, and they also go and get Anthony Richardson, right, who's this running, do-it-all quarterback who should open up opportunities for Jonathan Taylor. So that's exciting, but then you have Bijan going behind this already great Atlanta offensive line, who was like top 5 graded run blocking offensive lines in the NFL. They had a 1,000-yard rusher in Tyler Algier, who I think everybody was surprised because I don't think he's really that good. So you look at Bijan and you're like, wow, he's going to be a 1,600-yard guy off the bat. But the quarterback position isn't great, right? So they have Desmond Ridder stepping in as a first-year kind of solid starter in his second year in the NFL. And there's a lot of concerns there will he be able to take pressure off of the running game? Will he be able to open up that offense to open things up for Bijan? So I think that's kind of the debate at hand. So which guy do you think you would invest in if you were taking one today?
That's a tough one because it's probably Bijan, but I think what's being undersold for Jonathan Taylor is that you have the upside in all 22 of Anthony Richardson opening things up for him with that style of play. He's got the vertical passing game, then obviously that opens things up with his legs, with being sort of a Cam Newton light, if you can even call it light at this point, with his legs as well in the ground game. And you don't have to worry about stuff like, oh, well, you know, what about his red zone touches or goal line touches, right? We're just grading his actual performance. So we're eliminating that sort of variance that you worry about as far as, is he going to get the ball inside of the 2-yard line? No, it's more so that the totality of his carries are going to be in much better situations with more room to operate as a result of Anthony Richardson's presence. So I think in 2023, I think the answer is Taylor. For sure. I think clearly he's got the body of work. He's done it before, and the situation is there. I think beyond that, that's when you start to go into sort of how much time is left. And then that's when you look at Bijan Robinson or even a Jahmyr Gibbs, or more of those younger guys after that. But I think for 2023, it's Jonathan Taylor.
So that's where I wanted to go next. We have Breece Hall at 5, and we don't have Gibbs in our top 5. Gibbs is at 7, so not far behind, and there's Damian Pearson between them. So a lot of really good young talent. But when I look at Breece Hall and I look at Gibbs, I think there's a debate that maybe they should be switched. I think it's debatable. But which of those guys would you take, right? If you were starting a team today, you had to take one. Who are you taking?
I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm a big fan of his. I think as a pure prospect, if they were both coming out in the same draft class, you eliminate Hall's knee injury, for example, right? And they're just pure running back prospects going out for the draft. I think Gibbs is clearly the superior player and talent. And he still landed in a really good situation. That offensive line in Detroit, they've invested heavily in. You have Taylor Decker, Frank Ragnow, Penei Sewell. They have, weapons on that offense. That offense is productive. They obviously have a plan for Gibbs. He's a great receiver. I love everything about where Gibbs' situation is and where he sits today. So I'm taking Gibbs because I think it's the better talent. They're both in good situations, but so the talent is just going to win out for me. And I think that's Gibbs. And I'm also just always, I'm always scared of knee injuries. And I know it's 2023 and for the most part, they all come back, but not all do. I think Breece Hall will. Apparently that's a pretty clean injury that he suffered, so to speak. But give me the guy who's not had to go through that, who's also in a good situation, who I thought was better anyway.
Sure. The only issue I have with Gibbs is that they signed David Montgomery. So I don't want to ever have to worry about snaps, right? I never want to worry that my number one running back that I just made a huge investment in isn't going to reach the snap count minimum. But okay, let's go to the top rookies, which we have
12th overall, dude. He's going to get plenty of snaps.
Okay, we'll see. But Bijan, Gibbs, Charbonnet, Miller, and Spears. I think it's pretty straightforward. All of these guys landed in, decent situations. I think Charbonnet is the one guy where it was kind of a strange pick for Seattle, right? They had Kenneth Walker coming off of a great rookie season. But it could be, again, that they want to just reduce the carries for him and want to be able to depend on that run game. But the other guys I really like, and Miller, was the guy that I spoke about early on being the guy that I liked most out of like the later running backs after Gibbs and Bijan, because I liked his kind of style of play. I thought he had the most chance of success, and he ends up going fourth out of the running back group to New Orleans. And in my opinion, that's a great situation to land in. It's a situation where, it has a strong receiving game, so the pressure isn't going to be all on the running game. You still have a vet in Kamara to learn behind maybe for a year. But I think once that transition is made, Miller is a guy that could end up being a top back in the league every year.
Yeah, you're the Miller guy. I see it. I like it a lot. He's got the profile for it. And again, with sort of things happening there with Kamara and such, I could see him sort of ascending into that big role. So I'm a big fan of Miller as well. I like the spring in his legs. I think he could be a little bit more polished, if you will, but that's splitting hairs. You got a big back with size, with good athleticism there, and who's young. So I like that. You probably know my guy already. It's Tank Bigsby. And I know people might go, well, they have Travis Etienne there, so what's the opportunity really look like for him? But I think it's probably bigger than you think. I mean, aside from the fact that Etienne just sort of gets nicked up a lot and pretty often, I'm just a big fan of Bigsby's game. I like the investments that Jacksonville is making up front on the offensive line. Brandon Scherf had a down year last year, really the first one of his entire career. So I'm kind of watching that pretty closely to see if, that's just an anomaly, just sort of a one-off new environment, new situation type deal, and he'll bounce back. I liked Luke Fortner a bit coming out, who was a rookie last year. So, me, I kind of always disregard those rookie grades and just look to see sort of how they develop from there. They have Cam Robinson to go along with that. So I think they're slowly building that offense. They've gotten the weapons on the outside that they slowly improved. So I think there's going to be a clear defined role for Tank Bigsby, who really is a complete player who just kind of does it all as well. Probably doesn't get enough credit for how complete of a player he is. And I mean, it wouldn't shock me if Etienne goes down with one of those sort of, foot, ankle sprain type deals, and you see Bigsby come in and really perform very well and makes that a true 50-50 type committee at the very least. I would not be surprised if that happens. I'm a big fan. I guess I'm betting on the talent more so than anything else, given Etienne's presence there. But I have to shout out my guy Bigsby, and I don't want to bet against him.
I like his landing spot. I worry about Jacksonville's offensive line. They lost a starting tackle, but they do have some pretty solid pieces besides that. So yeah, agreed. But then let's go to sleepers, right? So everybody knows mine is Deuce Vaughn, and I'm going to stick with that till the day I die. And he goes to Dallas to kind of spell Tony Pollard, I hope. And Tony Pollard, again, coming off of an injury, he will be back. He should be healthy, but he's only on that 1-year deal. So is there a world that I think exists where Tony Pollard could, just not perform at the high level as, a workhorse back, which he's never really been asked to do before with the presence of Zeke? I think that world exists. And if it does, and they decide not to sign him to a long-term deal, I think you see a guy like Deuce Vaughn step in and be at least a 20 snap, 30 snap guy in the NFL. I think, that offense doesn't really have much besides that at running back. There's Mike Davis they brought in and Ronald Jones. I have no faith in Ronald Jones at all. I think Deuce will easily surpass him. So yeah, and I think even if Pollard does end up doing well, I do think that the Cowboys will not let him be this, workhorse back. I don't think he gets more than, I don't think he's a 200 carry back. I don't think that ever exists. So with that offensive line, with the weapons at wide receiver, with Dak, it's a great offense to step into and be just a role player in year one and then develop from there.
I hope you're right, I guess. It'd be great if Deuce Vaughn becomes this weapon. I think he can. And again, the great thing about this is we're projecting players based on how they perform in their given role. And we're not so worried about, he's not going to get 18 carries a game, so I'm going to automatically write off a great player like Deuce Vaughn. So, I'm a big fan of the plays that he can create. And we've seen that with Tony Pollard when he was in sort of his spellback role and how they designed the offense around getting the ball in his hands and allowing him to make some plays. They surely have that same sort of plan with Deuce Vaughn, if nothing else. And so if he excels in that role, which again, he's tailor-made for that, right? That's what he does. Then yeah, it's a great sort of landing spot and a great guy to sort of hang your hat on, since we're not just bound by the shackles of volume touches, if you will.
Exactly. Who's your guy?
Yeah, I'm going to go with DeWayne McBride, and more so because I think he's super talented. Now, the word is he fell in the draft because of sort of off the field stuff, right? And so we don't have the details. You never know too much about what's going on there, but there's just those whispers around Dalvin Cook in Minnesota, whether he'll be there next year, and if he is, whether he'll be there sort of the year after. So, I just think that his time is coming to an end, his being Dalvin Cook. I think Alexander Mattison is what he is as far as a good number 2 type guy to get 7 carries or so a game, but I don't see the talent that I see with DeWayne McBride, for example, right? So if they part ways with Dalvin Cook, if they make a move there, that spot is wide open for DeWayne McBride. on a team that otherwise is pretty solid throughout, has great weapons on the outside. They're not going to face a bunch of stacked boxes, decent on the offensive line, have a veteran quarterback. I mean, it's pretty much a situation where you could step up and step in and just play right away. So, assuming the off-field stuff checks out, and if something were to happen to Dalvin Cook, there's a huge opportunity for DeWayne McBride.
Yeah, I think it's regardless of platform, if it's all 22 or whatever it is that you play, he's a good pickup. He's definitely a good ad. But we saved the best for last, the most valuable for last, and that's wide receiver, and we did it on purpose. But wide receiver increased weight from 5.25%, which was already really high, to 5.89, making it, I believe, the third most valuable position in all 22. Ray, what was impacting this?
Whew, man, these people are spending money. And over the last 15 months or so, if you will, wide receivers have been the beneficiary, right? So we saw, I think Tyreek Hill had a huge contract. I don't even think he ended up in the top 5 APY anymore, right? Or actually, yes, he did. Yes, he did. Let me correct myself there. But yeah, you had some big contracts going out as I try to type and speak at the same time. Doesn't work out very well. Tyreek Hill with $30 million per year. Devontae Adams at $28 million per year. DeAndre Hopkins still has a big deal, even though his future is sort of uncertain. He's making over $27 million per year. And then you have Cooper Kupp and Stephon Diggs as well. So the bottom end of that top 5 sort of contract base, if you will, is at $25 million per year. So a lot of big deals signed over the last 12 months or so, some that didn't make it in to the 2022 update that are now in for 2023. So you see a huge increase there, which, again, outside of quarterback, these are the biggest risers. It's a passing league, and this just goes to show the value that the NFL is putting on these players.
Pretty wild, because I remember when Hill, Adams, Hopkins started getting these deals, we were saying they're getting paid like, mid-tier quarterbacks. But now quarterbacks are getting paid 50 plus million, just separating themselves. So that's how the NFL works, right? And that's why we think this is such a cool way to just weight these players. And you said it. So Hill, Adams, Hopkins, Kupp, and Brown are the top 5 paid wide receivers in the NFL today. But there's a lot of guys with upcoming contracts that might just blow these guys away, starting with that 2020 draft class, which was full of amazing talent. But those top 2 guys with Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb probably getting paid over the next 12 months. Do we think that they're going to just do we think they're going to blow it off the door? Like where do they end up? Are they going to be 35 mil, or are they just going to be like at, Hill's contract?
No, I think Justin Jefferson for sure is going to clear that, probably 32.5 at least, and then go from there. He's just proven to be such a weapon, most productive receiver in the league. So he's going to get a big payday for sure. CeeDee Lamb as well. I mean, Jerry Jones always gets fleeced in these deals when he tries to play hardball. So he's going to give CeeDee Lamb what he wants, which is probably going to be in that 30 mil range, 32-ish. I would say, if I had to put a number on it and bet. So yeah, I think these guys are going to clear. And then again, think about it. If you take out the 4th and 5th contracts here at 26.7 million per year, and then 25 million per year for Kupp and Brown, and then you replace that with 32, let's say, that's a sizable increase. That's 2 contracts by more than $6 million or more that you're now adding into the equation. So that's another big leap. So yeah, I don't think the value is going anywhere anytime soon. I think it's going to continue to climb, again, pretty much at a higher rate than any position outside of quarterback.
Sure. And another guy is T. Higgins, who's part of that 2020 class. He's going to be an interesting one to follow while everybody in Cincinnati is talking about taking discounts so that they could stay together. Will Higgins take a discount to stay there? I don't know. If I were him, I probably wouldn't. Although, he might value those Super Bowl rings that he hasn't gotten yet. But the top 5 ranked now, we're talking about Justin Jefferson being our number 1. I don't think there's going to be any debate there. We have Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb right after him, Drake London and Garrett Wilson next. Then a guy like Jalen Waddle, AJ Brown. We have Devonta Smith, DK Metcalf, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So this is one of the deepest positions in the NFL in terms of kind of a youth movement, right? These are all guys that are under maybe 26 years old. I think AJ Brown might be the oldest guy there. Everybody else might be under 25. So just a super young group of very talented receivers who are already grading well. How do you start to approach drafting this group of guys?
Yeah, just take the best young guy. I mean, if you have a chance at Jefferson, great, go for Jefferson. I think clearly the top dog there because of the amount of depth and youth. Yes, you wait on some of the older guys like a Tyreek Hill, quote unquote, older. Just which one do you like best? Because there's so many to choose from that, you can't argue with someone who says, "Oh no, I like AJ Brown more than CeeDee Lamb." Right? There's the only thing you could argue is, okay, well, there's a 3 or 2.5 year age difference there. So are you sure about that? Other than that, it's just flavor of ice cream because there's so many good young guys. I mean, Jalen Waddle versus CeeDee Lamb, you can go either way. It's just, again, what flavor of ice cream do you like? If you start to sort of parse through the weeds and go, well, what about their quarterback and this and that? I think you're kind of overthinking it a bit because these guys, just based on their talent alone, have proven they could take over games. They're not situation dependent, if you will. So in a startup, if I'm really sold and I want like the number one guy and I really want Justin Jefferson, great. But wide receiver is so deep that it may make more sense to look elsewhere at some other premium positions that may not be as deep, maybe like a cornerback, for example, and maybe gobble that up, or maybe get the best offensive guard. You get yourself a Quentin Nelson or a Trey Smith or something, and then circle back around to some other good receivers out there that maybe 27 years old, or maybe like a Chris Godwin or something, and you build from there. And then that there's a young crop of receivers coming out into the league later on, or you could take a chance on some of these rookies that you might be high on, like a Smith and Jigba or Jordan Addison or something like that. So the depth almost could potentially hurt the ADP value of some of these guys just based on draft strategy, but they're good. They're good and they're worth a lot. So you can't go wrong drafting a top guy early if they're your guy.
You definitely can. And I think the strategy should be, or can be, let's try to get one of them. And it doesn't necessarily matter which one of that top 10 you get, but you want to get one guy that you feel really good about, who's young, who's already producing. But I don't know if I would double dip, right? So that's kind of where, in a typical fantasy draft, if you're just doing, a regular league, you probably want 2 or 3 of these guys in order to feel really good about your team. That'll separate you. But if you're doing all 22, I think I would rather take that approach, right? There's only 2, corners, Sauce Gardner and Patrick Surtain, that I might feel really, really good about taking. Whereas wide receiver, there's 10 to 15. So let me go get that Sauce, and then let me come back and get, a Garrett Wilson in the second round. That's a different approach. And I think that's where I would lean. But you mentioned some of those younger guys, right? So we have Njigba at number 1, we have Quentin Johnston at 2, Zay Flowers at 3, Jordan Addison at 4, and then Jonathan Mingo at 5. So, some of these guys were surprises come draft day, right? Like, we didn't expect Jonathan Mingo to be the 5th guy, although we really did like him. But how do you start to value these guys when, a guy like Zay Flowers might be wide receiver 3 in that offense, where Jonathan Mingo might have a shot at being wide receiver 1?
Yeah, it's tough. I think first and foremost, you have to like the player, especially in a class like this where you're probably not discussing CeeDee Lamb versus Justin Jefferson, right? So you have to like the player first and foremost before going into their situation. If you like 2 players, then, okay, fine. What's their situation look like? And we talked about how you want to have the opportunity to have those big games that allow you to really have that weekly grade that sort of separates you from your opponent, right? It's kind of tough to do that more than once or twice a year if you're the 3rd option on an offense, like a Smith and Jigba, for example, right? There's going to be some games where there's going to be many games where he grades well and maybe has like 6 catches for 60 something yards and 4 of them are for a first down. And that's great. You're probably going to get a mid-70s grade there. That's really good. If everyone else can do that, you're going to win your game, right? But if you have someone like a Mingo and you're saying his competition for targets is who, Adam Thielen, then maybe in the latter half of the year, he may start to take over, and he's got a young quarterback like Bryce Young who might be looking to build that rapport with him. And he starts to take over that top role on the offense. you can have a big game. It's not like the NFC South is just boasting with top corners and great defenses there that are just going to shut them down just because his offense isn't very good. So maybe you take that chance then on a guy like Mingo if you like him as much as you might like whoever it is you're comparing him to. But I think first and foremost with a class like this where there's not any clear top flight stud type prospects like Clemson was throwing out there year after year with Sammy Watkins, sans the health issues early on in his career, like a DeAndre Hopkins or something, right? Like the player first and then go from there.
And I think that's good advice, especially because in all 22, right, it's not necessarily just about how many receptions and touchdowns you have. It's about how you play, play in and play out. So a guy like Jonathan Mingo might not end up getting 1,000 yards, but he might play really well. Or, I look at Jordan Addison, right? He was my guy. And I still think that, in my opinion, he's probably the best investment, being that he landed in a spot where he's going to get, number 2 receiver snaps, most likely. So he's going to be on the field. He's a great route runner. And there's Justin Jefferson across from him. So taking away double teams, which will give him opportunity. I think I still like that the most. But in Jigba, it doesn't have to be, 1,000-yard receiver either, or Mingo doesn't have to be a 1,000-yard receiver either to get solid grading, right? He needs to be a good route runner. He needs to get open. And he even needs to block. So those things, I think those receivers might, be fine in all 22, but we will see, right? It's going to take time to see how these things play out. And I don't think there's a bad investment there, considering now that wide receivers getting close to almost 6% weight.
Goodness. Just hearing you say that is like, oh man, 6% weight already for a wide receiver. Just goes to show you that's where the league is headed, man.
Yep, exactly. So any last comments on receivers? Is there any guy that you think is a sleeper here?
Not really. It's like I said, it's who you like. I actually had written down Mingo, and I wrote down here in the note, not sure if this is considered a sleeper anymore, but I had him written down just because he's got a path to seize a big role out there in Carolina. Now it's totally possible. I don't know, they sign a big free agent a year from now or something, or draft someone higher to sort of circumvent that or take over from there if he does improve it, because they will have a lot of cap space, moving forward as well. So there's a little bit of risk there, right? I think people might be seeing it as a bit more wide open than it actually is for his future situation there, but he has an opportunity to seize it. So I had written down Mingo. That's all I got for you guys. If you like him, I think he's worth a shot.
Yeah. So I'll just add that I really liked Tank Dell, right? I liked him a lot during the pre-draft process. And I do like his landing spot. He lands in Houston. Brandon Cooks leaves, right? So there's this obvious opportunity with a player with similar skill sets, right? Shifty route runner, speed. I think he fills that spot nicely. So he's definitely somebody that I'm interested in. I think if you're, if you're one of these guys that go after whoever Patrick Mahomes is throwing the ball to, Rashee Rice could be a sleeper, right? I think people are really getting high on him, although didn't love his pre-draft stuff. So I would lean towards the Tank Dell. But yeah, I think that's it. So, we went through a lot today, 4 different positions. It was definitely a lot, and we'll maybe not wait so long next time. Maybe we'll get back into the dailies going through these, but we'll see. And thank you everyone for tuning in. If you haven't yet, please give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at all22_PFF, and leave us a review wherever you watch or listen to your podcast. Thank you for tuning in.